Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. This is a supplementary video which provides an overview of my current research on Austrian-American economist Gottfried von Haberler's alterations to David Ricardo. For people who don't know me, my name is Ritterman. I'm an economist currently working at the Ministry of Finance for the Government of Ontario. I have a Master's of Arts in Economics. I'll be presenting this research paper virtually at the upcoming 2024 History of Economic Society conference, which will be held in Santiago, Chile. This is a slightly longer version of my presentation, which I'll be uploading to my private YouTube channel. As mentioned previously, my research paper examines current portrayals of David Ricardo as influenced by Gottfried von Haberler's Reformulations. To begin, there are strong reasons to question the current presentation of comparative advantage theory, which inaccurately incorporates the concept of opportunity costs and attributes this formulation to Ricardo. This misattribution is highly problematic, as it was Austrian economist Friedrich von Wieser who formalized the concept of opportunity cost. Moreover, the concept of opportunity costs fundamentally differ from the theories of value advanced by British political economists such as Adam Smith and David Ricardo, which raises doubts about whether an opportunity cost-based formulation of Ricardo's numerical example successfully conveys Ricardo's original ideas as laid out in the principles. It is a well-established fact that Ricardo's current portrayal in economics textbooks has been significantly influenced by Gottfried von Haberler. Haberler's reformulations to Ricardo have been received quite favorably by many economists. Indeed, many economists have gone so far as to suggest that the reformulations were necessary. Although he provided several reasons, Haberler's primary reason for reformulating Ricardo was motivated by his desire to disassociate Ricardo's theory of foreign trade, often referred to as the theory of comparative advantage, from Ricardo's theory of value. Haberler's intention was to align his new formulation of Ricardo with modern general equilibrium theory. Haberler's interpretation of Ricardo's theory of value can be found in several publications. In his 1936 text, The Theory of International Trade, he writes the following: "It is common knowledge that the classical economists use the labor cost theory of value. This theory asserts that goods are exchanged against one another according to the relative amounts of labor embodied in them. Setting aside the important issue of how to interpret Ricardo's theory of exchange value correctly, it is apparent from Haberler's statements that he misunderstands the true purpose behind Ricardo's numerical example. An examination of Ricardo's statements leading up to his numerical illustration suggests Ricardo's intentions were to show that bundles of commodities do not exchange according to the relative amounts of labor embodied in them, contrary to what Haberler suggests. Ricardo begins by writing that the rule which regulates domestic trade is not the same as the rule which regulates foreign trade. He writes, "The same rule which regulates the relative value of commodities in one country does not regulate the relative value of commodities exchanged between two or more countries." He then elaborates, writing that the reason for utilizing different rules has to do with differences in the prevailing rate of profit. He writes, "In one and the same country, profits are, generally speaking, always on the same level, or differ only as the employment of capital may be more or less secure and agreeable. It is not so between different countries." He then says the following: "The quantity of wine which she shall give in exchange for the cloth of England is not determined by the respective quantities of labor devoted to the production of each, as it would be if both commodities were manufactured in England or both in Portugal." Ricardo then proceeds to provide his famous numerical example, which we will analyze momentarily, but the passages quoted previously raise several questions. If Haberler and Ricardo were both in agreement that commodities' exchange values do not correspond to the relative quantities of labor embodied in them, then what was the need to reformulate Ricardo? Haberler's failure to recognize this aspect of Ricardo's numerical illustration further emphasizes the need to revisit his reformulations. Beyond what was stated previously, an examination of Haberler's publications suggests he misinterpreted Ricardo's numerical example in several ways. He interpreted the 4 numerical values as hours of labor needed by each country to produce 1 unit of cloth and wine. The 4 numbers are not hours of labor, rather number of men working for a year, that is 100 Englishmen or 90 Portuguese men. Moreover, the exact quantities of cloth and wine contained within each bundle is not provided. From his own erroneous interpretation, Haberler mistakenly deduces that Portugal requires a, quote, smaller labor effort per unit of output in both cloth and wine production, implying that Portugal is productively superior to England. Comparing Haberler's interpretation with Ricardo's own account reveals several discrepancies. The correct interpretation of the 4 numbers is number of men working for a year required to produce unspecified amounts of cloth and wine traded between England and Portugal. An unspecified amount of cloth is produced by 100 Englishmen working for a year, which is exported to Portugal in exchange for an unspecified amount of wine, which requires the labor of 80 Portuguese men also working for a year. Given that textbook portrayals of Ricardo are based on Haberler's flawed interpretation, there are strong reasons to doubt whether the common understanding of Ricardo's theory of foreign trade in academic discourse accurately reflects Ricardo's original intentions and insights. A close examination of Haberler's publications further suggests he uncritically accepted long-standing myths implying Ricardo advocated a different rule of specialization than Adam Smith. As shown successfully in a 2021 paper by Dr. Morales-Mayoki, the long-running myth suggesting Ricardo formulated a new rule of specialization, quote, comparative advantage, separate and distinct from Smith's absolute advantage, actually dates back to a misreading of Ricardo's numerical example by John Stuart Mill in his essays on some unsettled questions of political economy, published in 1844, as well as his Principles of Political Economy, published in 1848. As explained in the paper, Mill's erroneous conclusion that international trade is governed by comparative cost as opposed to absolute cost of production stemmed from his failure to differentiate between cost of production and cost price. Mill writes, the cost of production, together with the ordinary profit, may therefore be called the necessary price or value of all things made by labor and capital. But what Mill failed to recognize was that Ricardo uses necessary price synonymously with both cost of production and natural price. Dr. Morales-Mayoki's findings raise significant concerns regarding both Haberler's understanding of Ricardo as well as the accuracy of conventional textbook narratives, suggesting that Ricardo and Smith's theory of foreign trade are much more similar than commonly believed. Contrary to what critics of Smith and Ricardo often suggest, the classical economists do not try and explain commodities' market prices directly. Both Smith and Ricardo distinguish between natural price and market price, and what is often being referenced is the natural price. Note that Ricardo uses natural price synonymously with cost of production, and that cost of production or natural price is defined as cost price plus the ordinary rate of profit. To illustrate how Ricardo calculates cost of production, consider the following hypothetical numerical example. Suppose commodity X has a cost price of $100. Then suppose there are 2 countries, country A and B, and that the rate of profit in country A is 15%, while the rate of profit in country B is 30%. The cost of production in country A would be calculated as $100, the cost price, plus $15, the rate of profit, which equals to $115. Similarly, the cost of production in country B would be $100 plus $30, which equals to $130. Note that the figures do not represent the market price of commodities, rather their natural prices. The market price of a commodity can be below, above, or the same as the natural price, and that the rate of profit is typically higher in poorer countries than richer countries. Haberler correctly notes that the classical economists distinguish between home and foreign trade, but he remains preoccupied with factor mobility while overlooking the importance of the rate of profit for determining exchange values. As mentioned previously, the classical economists like David Ricardo employ a different method for determining exchange values within a country as opposed to exchanges between countries. The reason for this has to do with their view that the rate of profit tends towards uniformity within a country, but that it varies between countries based on structural factors. Smith and Ricardo do not make explicit assumptions about factor mobility, and to the degree that they do, textual evidence contradicts Haberler's claims. For example, in chapter 19 of the Principles, Ricardo's statements contradict Haberler's claim that the classical economists assumed perfect factor mobility within a country's national borders. The chapter discusses instances where workers might be dislocated when capitalists quickly transition from circulating capital to fixed capital. Haberler correctly noted that the classical economists assumed relative factor immobility between countries, but he failed to engage with their reasoning, which is somewhat persuasive. Both Smith and Ricardo believed that capitalists would refrain from realizing higher profits in foreign countries because capitalists have a natural preference for supporting domestic industries over foreign industries. Individuals feel safer investing domestically because investors are more familiar with the domestic market, its regulations, its legal system, and other aspects of the society. Smith pointed out that domestic investments not only benefit the investor, but also reinforce and support the national industry, leading to more significant national revenue and productivity. Smith also believed that returns to home trade are faster than returns to foreign trade. Initially, three competing interpretations of comparative advantage were put forward: Jacob Weiner's real cost approach, Haberler's opportunity cost approach, and Bertil Ohlen's factor endowment approach. Haberler's reformulations are by far the most popular, as they are currently taught in virtually all introductory economics classrooms. Ohlen's factor endowment approach is the second most popular, as it is typically taught in upper year undergraduate classrooms or graduate level classrooms. Weiner's reformulations are arguably the least popular. The reason for its rejection stems from the belief that Weiner's real cost approach, based on the works of Alfred Marshall and John Eliot Keynes, was too close to the labor theory of value. Haberler's reformulations also laid the foundations for what the contemporary international trade textbooks refer to as the Ricardian model. The model posits the existence of a substitution curve where two commodities with unequal but constant unit labor costs are exchanged, and their exchange ratios between the two commodities equal their opportunity cost. It is quite clear that the model rests on a different logic than Ricardo's. The model also makes a variety of different assumptions, which include constant unit labor requirements, zero transportation costs, full employment of resources, and perfect internal mobility of the factors of production. Differentiating between the assumptions of the textbook Ricardian model and Ricardo's original theoretical concepts is important for ensuring theoretical accuracy, as the mistaken view that Ricardo's theory of foreign trade rests on several unrealistic assumptions can lead to misguided economic policies. In contemporary economics textbooks, Ricardo's numerical example is shown in two ways. Either readers are shown explicit levels of output, such as in Table 3, or the opportunity cost ratios are provided directly, such as in Table 4. By contrast, and as noted previously, Ricardo does not specify the level of output for cloth and wine in his numerical example. Nor can the concept of opportunity cost be found in the principles, as it belongs to a separate theoretical paradigm. Contemporary economics textbooks perpetuate the false notion that smaller countries like Portugal may have a comparative advantage over bigger countries like England, even if these bigger countries have an absolute advantage over smaller countries. On the one hand, these narratives are based on the false premise that Ricardo and Smith advocated divergent rules of specialization. On the other hand, the logic of Ricardo's theory of foreign trade is also misrepresented in contemporary textbooks because they perpetuate the idea that pursuit of comparative advantage entails countries specialize in specific industries or the production of certain types of commodities. This issue has been acknowledged by at least two scholars, Dr. Takashi Negishi and Dr. Jorge Morales Meoki. Indeed, Haberler heavily implies in his writings that Ricardo advocates complete specialization, either in the production of specific goods or specific industries, depending on the country's comparative advantage. This idea is echoed in international trade textbooks, which state that international trade allows countries to specialize in the production of goods in which they enjoy a comparative advantage. Of course, international trade does foster specialization, but there is little evidence to suggest Ricardo recommends countries to fully commit to specific industries or that they should produce one type of good. Ricardo only hints at partial specialization. Finally, there are strong reasons to doubt textbook claims suggesting that the purpose of Ricardo's numerical example was to illustrate gains from trade. While not attributing this insight to Ricardo directly, Haberler suggests international trade fosters division of labor, and that this leads to gains of trade. Textbooks, on the other hand, suggest engaging in international trade directly leads to gains from trade. This position is also held by some Ricardo scholars, such as Andrea Maneschi, who argues that the true purpose of the four numbers was to quantify gains from trade. This is not to dispute whether countries gain from trade. Of course, countries do gain from trade. Rather, the key issue is whether Ricardo's numerical illustration should be understood as an effort to demonstrate or quantify gains from trade, as some suggest. Dr. Morales Meoki has also examined this claim in detail. His findings suggest John Stuart Mill also played a central role in popularizing this myth. A quote by Ricardo may provide insights into his thinking on the benefits of free trade. He says, "The motive which determines us to import a commodity is the discovery of its relative cheapness abroad. It is the comparison of its price abroad with its price at home." Ricardo's statement suggests his goal was to demonstrate that international trade will benefit smaller countries by allowing them to import goods more cheaply from bigger countries, rather than to try and produce these goods domestically. Allowing for cheaper imports both lowers market prices and expands the range of commodities available to consumers, contributing to increases in riches, which Ricardo describes as necessaries, conveniences, and enjoyments. The need to revisit Haberler's Reformulations cannot be overstated, given its significant impact on the prevailing understanding of Ricardo's works. Misunderstandings of Ricardo continue to affect a wide range of debates, ranging from the desirability of free trade policies to the relevance of classical economic theory for contemporary economic analysis. Critics of Ricardo often fault him for holding unrealistic assumptions, or for deriving conclusions that are inconsistent with historical reality, such as Portugal's alleged productivity advantage over England, not knowing that there is little evidence suggesting that he made such assumptions, or that he deduced conclusions that were inconsistent with historical realities. Failing to differentiate between Ricardo's original ideas and subsequent revisions increases the chances of engaging with strawman arguments, where significant effort is spent criticizing inaccurate portrayals of Ricardo. Not only can misinterpretations of the classical economists distort students' education, but they can potentially lead to flawed policy recommendations. The purpose of this paper is not to discourage readers from criticizing Ricardo. Rather, the goal is to foster a more informed discussion on both the merits of free trade as well as the utility of classical economic theory for contemporary economic analysis. Ensuring that discussions are rooted in an accurate interpretation of theoretical concepts can significantly enhance academic rigor and the quality of scholarly debates. Thank you so much for watching this, and here are the references in case anyone needs them. Thank you.